Nobody asked for it, but Scary Movie is back in theaters. A full-throttle parody with proudly crude humor, taking swings at horror all over again. Films like this felt like relics of the 80s, or the 2000s at the very latest, back when you could still joke about anything. So, is the age of the parody movie really over? In this video essay, we'll walk through the genre's tangled history, the strange rise of Scary Movie, its slow decline, and the comeback nobody saw coming. Fair warning before we start. There's a fair amount of footage in this one you probably shouldn't watch over lunch.
What's up? What's up?
Parody is as old as cinema itself. The first ones appeared back in the silent era when the rules of the genres were only beginning to set. Take The Little Train Robbery from 1905, a comic mirror of The Great Train Robbery, one of the first westerns in history, remade with children in every leading role. But the genre really came alive by the middle of the century, once some of those genres had slid into crisis. Abbott and Costello spent the late 40s needling Universal's classic monster movies in their trademark style. And by that point, the monsters were openly stagnating in an endless run of sequels and crossovers.
Open sesame! Oh, open sesame! Oh, sesame! Oh,
There were odder cases too. James Bond had barely become a phenomenon before the parody arrived. The 1967 Casino Royale, a comic riff on Ian Fleming's original novel. Soon after, Woody Allen made Love and Death, a fan remix of the great Russian novels Tolstoy and Dostoevsky by way of one neurotic New Yorker. The Monty Python films belong here as well. Their sketches ran on parody, and Monty Python and the Holy Grail cheerfully dismantled the entire legend of King Arthur.
A grail?
Yes, I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes!
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it's fine.
Splendid. Thank you.
The Golden Age proper begins in the 70s, and it begins with Mel Brooks. What makes his films interesting is that they're not simple send-ups of plot cliches. They're declarations of love for cinema, from the traditional Western to the Hitchcock thriller. Young Frankenstein pokes fun at the classic horror films with one hand and writes them a love letter with the other. It's closer to an homage, with the old aesthetic recreated in obsessive detail. Brooks shot in black and white, and even tracked down the original laboratory equipment from the 1931 Frankenstein.
Lies! Lies, do you hear me? Give my creation life!
The same can't be said of Jim Abrahams and the Zucker brothers, who became Hollywood's chief parodists in the 80s and went after everything in sight. Disaster movies in Airplane, military action in Hot Shots, police thrillers in The Naked Gun. Eventually, even the crime sagas of Scorsese and Coppola got theirs. This is the moment parody acquired a canon of its own. Brooks still bothered with something like a story. In the Abraham Zucker films, what matters is the density of jokes per minute of runtime, and the amount of crude material multiplied several times over. The other signature is the acting. You probably remember Leslie Nielsen in The Naked Gun. The film itself is a cascade of sketches about police work, but Nielsen plays it almost completely straight, as if he weren't in a parody at all, but in a serious drama. Compare that with Jim Carrey's famously rubber-faced style. The joke lands precisely because these characters are not, let's say, blessed with great intellect, yet carry themselves with total seriousness.
I flew single-engine fighters in the Air Force, but this plane has 4 engines. It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
The success of the Abraham Zucker films set off a whole wave of parodies in the late 80s and especially the 90s. Mel Brooks returned to the genre with Spaceballs, and it's hard not to recognize the target, a certain space opera from a galaxy. Leslie Nielsen tried on An Exorcist's Collar, and Austin Powers was just around the corner, probably the most successful Bond spoof ever made.
We get the warhead, and we hold the world ransom for $1 million.
But by the 90s, it was clear that the genre itself had hardened. Nielsen's new outings no longer landed the way they had a decade earlier, and the rest of the field added nothing essentially new to the formula. Filmmakers still reacted fast to the hits of the day, Basic Instinct included, and still needled the big franchises. But the novelty was gone, completely. Parody needed a renaissance of its own. It didn't have to wait long.
Do you like scary movies? Mm-hmm. What's your favorite?
Scary Movie raises an eyebrow at the concept stage already. The franchise began as a parody of the popular slashers, Wes Craven's Scream above all. The catch is that Scream was itself a postmodern rethink of horror, a parody in essence where the characters understood the rules of the game and explained out loud how the genre works.
That's why she always outsmarted the killer in the big chase scene at the end. Only virgins can do that. Don't you know the rules?
That didn't stop the Wayans brothers from adding their own word on the subject. Slasher characters, as they saw it, behaved like idiots, and the plots rarely held together. So the brothers decided to push all of it into open absurdity. Comedy fans already knew them, at the very least from the cult classic Don't Be a Menace to South Central, which was, yes, a parody of the hood dramas of the early 90s.
I feel sorry for your mother.
What you say about my mama? Huh?
At first glance, Scary Movie isn't far from the Abraham Zucker school. Comedies that are fairly shapeless by any traditional measure of drama. Each film has a spine of a plot, a masked killer in the suburbs in the first one, a classic haunted house in the sequel. But mostly these are strings of comic scenes with a million references to other pictures. The franchise is called Scary Movie, yet it parodies whatever it pleases. The Matrix, $1 Million Baby, War of the Worlds, Shyamalan's Thrillers, the Planet of the Apes reboot, Inception, Black Swan, and on down the list.
I did it! We're saved! What's wrong? Wrong foot. Mother.
Each entry becomes an elaborate intertextual game, practically a cinephile scavenger hunt where the viewer is invited to catch every reference. And the line between mockery and homage is blurrier than you'd expect.
Oh, shit, son.
Strange as it sounds to say about Scary Movie, these films add up to an encyclopedia of mainstream cinema, a panorama of the era, with every major title of its moment somewhere in the frame. And since the stream of gags moves this fast, the films guaranteed themselves at least a couple of rewatches. You simply couldn't catch everything the first time. It also matters who these films were made for. Not film buffs in general, young audiences specifically. Scary Movie is engineered for parties. Putting on a serious drama in that setting would be strange, but a comedy with a plot loose enough to join from any random minute goes down perfectly. Nothing here asks you to empathize or believe. The characters keep discovering a camera in front of their faces, and occasionally the entire film crew.
There's a sound guy, there's a script supervisor. How you doing, baby?
To be fair, breaking the fourth wall and exposing the illusion showed up in the earliest parodies as well. A Scary Movie, an ideal illustration of the concept of the feast of the bodily lower stratum. The literary scholar Mikhail Bakhtin described medieval carnivals, a space where the usual laws and church prohibitions were suspended. People could safely release the built-up pressure, and the whole event turned into a hymn to excess. The franchise, at its core, has exactly one rule: no rules. By today's standards, the humor is bluntly un-PC, sexist and racist jokes in bulk, nudity for its own sake, and a devoted interest in every fluid the human body can produce.
Fuck this.
Fuck. Did you see this? Look at this.
Even the actors deliberately played over the top, nothing like the reserved Nielsen, all in the name of throwing out every taboo and laughing at absolutely anything, from bargain bin horror to the United Nations. Celebrities get it worst of all, standing trial for the entire hypocritical entertainment industry. Is it cynical? Deeply. But that too is a feature of the time, especially after September 11th.
Thank you all.
Your love has broken the curse and freed my soul. I'll never have to kill again. Really?
As a comedy, Scary Movie worked less as escapism than as a valve for letting off steam. Nothing was sacred to these films. The fourth one even parodies the famous footage of the president being informed about the attack. Catching the nerve of the moment, reacting instantly to whatever is on screens right now, is the parody's defining trait. It's also its curse. 20-odd years later, watching Scary Movie without context is a slightly strange experience. The films are pleasant to revisit out of warm nostalgia, but stripped of their targets, from Scream to Paranormal Activity, and of that instant recognition of every reference, they seem to lose their charm. And that may be the central problem of Scary Movie and of parody in general. Blink, and it's already dated.
What would have been your last words to Drew?
Run, bitch! Run!
The success of the first two Wayans films launched a new wave of parodies, some of them made by people with Scary Movie itself on their resumes. Screenwriters Jason Friedberg and Aaron Seltzer, who had worked on the first film, went on to make their own names with Epic Movie and Meet the Spartans.
Are you my mama? Because I'm ready to suckle a teat.
As in the Golden Age, the 2000s mocked everything within earshot. Superheroes were being ridiculed long before Marvel's era of dominance. Superhero Movie went after Spider-Man and the X-Men, the most popular comic book films of the day. Epic Movie, meanwhile, was a grab bag of recent hits, where the Chronicles of Narnia collided with Pirates of the Caribbean.
Wait, so this whole thing was a setup just to get information out of me?
Sorry, mate. This isn't even a working pirate ship.
The formula, though, stayed roughly the same everywhere. Recognizable images inflated to the grotesque, what's politely called toilet humor, and a token plot compensated by a machine gun burst of off-color jokes and sight gags. By the 2010s, Hollywood's interest was fading. After the brothers parted ways with the Scary Movie producers, Marlon Wayans tried to repeat the series' success under a different banner, A Haunted House, but never came close to the old numbers. The parodists kept cutting close to the bone, taking on 50 Shades of Grey, among other things. But the era of the classical parody, the kind Abrahams and the Zuckers invented, seemed to be gone for good.
Just how many sequels to Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America can we make, right? And you're pretty handy with that bow and arrow.
I'll nick the the bow and arrow's sort of my thing.
Shut your ass, Hawkeye!
The cultural climate wasn't helping either. By the late 2000s, audiences had lost their appetite for pure acid. The new sincerity was coming into fashion. Authors unafraid to talk about feelings, smuggling genuinely affecting stories about ordinary people into theaters under the cover of parody. Edgar Wright played with genre codes too. Zombie horror in Shaun of the Dead, the cop buddy movie in Hot Fuzz. But at the center of his plots stood the fate of a small man in extraordinary circumstances. And even when the heroes weren't people at all but vampires, as in What We Do in the Shadows, the story was still built on very human relationships, household headaches, and painfully familiar situations, not on a chain of gags. Parody became practically a premium genre with unlimited room for experiment. You can see it clearly in the early seasons of The Boys, a show that mocked superhero blockbusters but offered, at first, considerably more than caricature. So no, parody didn't disappear in the 10s, it mutated, and the audience came out ahead.
You make a movie film have happy ending? Not.
The Scary Movie creators, meanwhile, went quiet for more than a decade. In that time, horror lived through a quiet revolution of its own. A new generation of filmmakers bet on atmosphere and psychological dread rather than the routine jump scare. You might expect the new Scary Movie to aim exactly there, at the modern classics, the Jordan Peele and Ari Aster school. In practice, the Wayans comeback, billed as a spiritual sequel to the first two films, is one more riff on Scream, seasoned with nods to the horror hits of the years in between, which is doubly ironic, considering the latest Ghostface film had just limped in with the worst reviews in the franchise's 30-year history. So did the bet pay off? The critics say no. The box office says otherwise. Creatively, it's roughly what the earlier films were. But the whole thing plays like a revenge story for the Wayans brothers, who, remember, were once pushed out of their own franchise. Whether a flood of new crude comedies is coming, it's too early to say. Lately, Parody has mostly moved in with bloggers and settled into short-form video. The Naked Gun did return to the big screen last year, a legacy sequel and a reboot of the old Nielsen series at once, but its box office run stayed modest.
What the heck are you people? Have you been watching us this whole time?
Parodies have died and been resurrected before. They've been filed away in the Museum of Cinema and hauled back onto the big screen. The genre will probably never disappear for good, but more than any other, it depends on what's happening in theaters and outside them. Every parody tests the boundary of the permissible, what we're allowed to laugh at and what we're not. So the successes and failures of a scary movie say less about the movies than about the society watching them. The main thing is to remember that laughter is the best medicine, and that now and then, it's healthy to laugh at yourself.
Ah, shit, son! Yo, what the deal? Yo, y'all watching this tape right now? That means I didn't make it. Either I'm a prisoner, or worse, dead.